The galaxy was peaceful, or so it seemed. For centuries, different civilizations had thrived in their own corners of the universe. Some were ancient and wise. Others were young and ambitious. Yet there was one thing they all shared: a sense of security. No one truly believed that anything could shake the peace they had enjoyed for so long. That peace was shattered in the blink of an eye. It began with a strange disturbance at the edge of known space. A deep signal, unlike anything anyone had ever encountered before, appeared on sensors. At first, it was dismissed as a glitch, perhaps a random cosmic event or an unknown space phenomenon. But when the same signal was picked up across multiple systems, it became clear that something was amiss. A few days later, the first attack came. It was not like the battles or wars the galaxy's great powers were used to. No, this was something different. This was fast, swift, unstoppable. No one knew who or what was behind the attack. It was as if a massive shadow had appeared out of nowhere, engulfing everything in its path. Entire fleets, some of the most advanced in the galaxy, were destroyed in mere minutes. The enemy didn't speak, didn't negotiate. They simply came, and they destroyed. On Earth, things were not much better. People went about their daily lives, unaware of the approaching storm. But when the news broke, it was too late. The invaders were already at the doorstep. The first signs of danger were distant at first. Faint explosions were seen in the skies, like stars blinking out of existence. But it didn't take long before the news spread that Earth was in danger. Panic set in quickly. People rushed to the streets, hoping for answers. But the government was in chaos. Military leaders were scrambling, trying to make sense of the reports coming in from all over the galaxy. Communications with other planets went dark. They had no idea what they were up against. The only thing they knew for certain was that the enemy was coming, and they were unstoppable. Across the world, leaders met in secret, trying to plan a defense, but their minds were filled with doubt. Could humanity really stand against such an unknown threat? How could they fight something that had already destroyed fleets stronger than anything Earth had? The enemy wasn't just a force of nature. They were intelligent, calculating, and ruthless. It was in one of these meetings that a single voice rose above the rest. A young officer, no more than 25, stood in front of the room, her eyes fierce with determination. We can't just give up. Humanity has survived worse. We may not have the biggest fleets or the most advanced technology, but we have something the others don't. We have heart, and that heart is what will drive us to fight. Her words struck a chord with the others. It wasn't much, but it was something. The leaders knew they had to act, and quickly. They began to formulate a plan. Their options were limited, and time was running out. They couldn't rely on conventional weapons. The alien forces were too powerful for that. So they turned to the one thing they had left: their ingenuity. As the first waves of destruction hit Earth, people took to hiding in bunkers, evacuating cities, and trying to stay alive. The attacks were swift and brutal. One moment, people were going about their day, and the next, the sky was lit up with explosions. Entire cities were reduced to rubble in seconds, as if the enemy had known exactly where to strike. But amid the chaos, there was a growing sense of unity. People banded together, trying to help each other survive. Governments began to work together, pooling resources to fight back. Earth wasn't alone in this fight, but it felt like it. No one had the answers. No one knew who these invaders were or where they had come from. The only thing that mattered now was survival. The days that followed were filled with fear and uncertainty. Reports came in of other planets being wiped out, whole civilizations disappearing without a trace. And still, the alien force advanced. It was clear that this was no random attack. This was an invasion, a plan to wipe out everything in its path. As the darkness continued to spread, hope seemed to fade with each passing hour. People questioned whether humanity could survive this. Could they stand against something so powerful, so deadly? And yet, in the darkest of moments, there was a glimmer of hope. Humanity had always survived against the odds. The very things that made them weak, their emotions, their compassion, were now their strength. In secret, teams of scientists and military experts began to work together, scrambling to develop any sort of defense. They knew that the first step was to understand the enemy. But the enemy was unlike anything they had encountered before. There were no signs of weakness, no obvious flaws in their strategy. The only thing they knew for sure was that they were dealing with an unstoppable force. As Earth's leaders gathered to discuss their next move, one thing became clear. Humanity could no longer afford to sit back and wait. The time to act was now. And though they were outmatched, they would fight. For their home, for their people, for their future. The darkness was here, but humanity was not ready to go down without a fight. They would answer the call, no matter what it took. In the weeks that followed the first wave of destruction, humanity found itself at a crossroads. The planet was in ruins, cities were nothing but crumbling foundations, and the death toll rose daily. People who once lived normal lives now lived in constant fear, unsure if they would see another sunrise. And yet, despite the terror and the overwhelming odds, there was still a spark of resistance. Humanity's leaders had met in secret, desperate to come up with a plan to survive. Military strategists, scientists, and engineers worked tirelessly around the clock, all trying to piece together something, anything, that could help them stand a chance. But as the days dragged on, their options grew slimmer. The aliens had superior technology, weapons that could obliterate entire cities in an instant. And yet, humanity was far from ready to give up. A small group of military officers and scientists gathered in a makeshift command center deep underground. Their faces were grim, but their eyes burned with determination. They knew the first part of the battle had been lost. The enemy was too powerful, and they had caught humanity off guard. But they weren't about to surrender. Not yet. "We can't just sit here and wait to die," Colonel Marlowe said, his voice steady, but filled with a deep urgency. "We need to take the fight to them. We need to hit them where it hurts." The room fell silent. Marlowe's words struck a chord. But what did that mean? How could they strike back when the enemy had already proven themselves to be so overwhelming? Dr. Allison Carter, one of the lead scientists, pushed her glasses up and looked over at the group. "What if we think differently? We've been trying to fight them head-on, with weapons and tactics we already know. But maybe we need to look at this from a different angle. What if we're fighting the wrong battle?" "What do you mean?" Lieutenant Shaw asked, his voice laced with doubt. "They're wiping us out with no mercy. We're losing this war, Dr. Carter." "Exactly," she replied, her eyes focused on the screen in front of her, filled with data about the alien invaders. "We're fighting the wrong way. They've got strength, technology, numbers. But we have something they don't: creativity. The ability to adapt when everything seems impossible. But we need more than just creativity," Shaw said. "We need power. We need weapons." "That's where I'm getting at," Dr. Carter continued. "Instead of trying to fight them with brute force, we should use what we know best: our ingenuity. We got brilliant engineers, mathematicians, and programmers. If we can't defeat them directly, maybe we can outsmart them." The idea was bold, and it seemed almost foolish given the circumstances. But the more they talked, the more it made sense. They couldn't go toe-to-toe with the aliens, but if they could find a way to disrupt their technology, to exploit their weaknesses, then maybe they could turn the tide. "We've been analyzing their ships, their weapon systems," said Commander Flynn, a grizzled veteran who had seen many wars. "I've been wondering, what if they're not as invincible as they seem? What if they've got weaknesses we can exploit?" "It's possible," Dr. Carter replied. "They're highly advanced, but every technology has flaws. We just need to find them." The room buzzed with new energy as everyone began brainstorming. The idea of using the aliens' own technology against them wasn't just a pipe dream. It was a real possibility. They couldn't replicate what the invaders had, but they could understand it, adapt it, and reverse engineer it. It was risky, yes, but what choice did they have? Colonel Marlowe stood up and walked to the front of the room, his expression serious. We've lost a lot already. Earth is a shadow of what it once was. But there's one thing we know for sure. The aliens didn't expect us to fight back like this. We've been underestimated, and that's our advantage. They think we'll crumble under pressure. They don't realize that we'll do anything to survive. But we need time, Dr. Carter pointed out. And time is something we don't have. We'll make time, Marlowe said. We'll make them give us the time we need. We'll show them just how resourceful we are. Over the next few days, they set to work. While Earth's remaining military forces fended off any immediate attacks, the scientists and engineers worked feverishly in secret. They began developing a new form of warfare, not one that relied on sheer firepower, but one that used their knowledge of the enemy's technology against them. The plan was simple, but dangerous. They would infiltrate the alien ships, hack their systems, and attempt to sabotage their weapons from the inside. It was a mission that would require the bravest of soldiers, those willing to risk everything for a chance at survival. Meanwhile, Earth's remaining forces gathered their courage, preparing for what would be the biggest gamble of their lives. They had no illusions about what lay ahead. This was a desperate plan, one that had a high chance of failure. But it was the only plan they had. As the days passed, the fear that had gripped the world slowly began to shift into something else. Hope. The thought that maybe, just maybe, humanity could turn this around began to take root. They had always been resourceful, always found a way to survive. This time, it would be no different. The fight was far from over, but now they had a plan. In the darkest moments, humanity had found a light, and it was brighter than anyone had expected. The day had come. The plan that had been slowly pieced together over the last few weeks was about to be set into motion. Everyone involved knew the risks, knew that failure was almost certain, but there was no turning back now. The alien forces had continued their relentless march, obliterating every last bit of resistance, but humanity refused to roll over. Colonel Marlowe paced back and forth in the underground command center, his thoughts racing. The room was filled with the hum of computers and the quiet murmur of voices. Officers and soldiers were preparing for a mission that would push them to their limits. In one corner, engineers were finalizing the tools needed to hack into the alien systems, while the rest of the team made final checks on the weapons and tech they had salvaged from the wreckage of past battles. Their resources were limited, but their resolve was anything but. 5 minutes to launch, Lieutenant Shaw said, his voice steady despite the pressure. He looked over at Colonel Marlowe. "We're ready, sir." Marlowe nodded, though the knot in his stomach refused to loosen. Every part of this plan felt like a shot in the dark. They were about to take their fight to the heart of the alien invasion, board their ships, break into their command centers, and cripple their systems from within. The humans knew that even a small success could shift the balance of power, but the reality was, no one knew if they would even survive long enough to make it inside the enemy ship. The team of elite soldiers, dressed in camouflage suits that blended with the alien environment, was ready to deploy. They would be the first to board the enemy's ships, infiltrate, and sabotage their control systems. They had been trained for the impossible, but the odds had never been stacked so high before. They were humanity's last hope. As the countdown to launch ticked down, each soldier took a moment to think about what they were about to do. This wasn't just about them. It was about Earth. It was about the survival of their species, the future of their families, and the future of every living thing on their planet. If they failed, everything they had fought for would be for nothing. "We're with you, sir," one of the soldiers said to Colonel Marlowe as he adjusted the strap of his weapon. He looked around at his fellow soldiers, all of them nodding in agreement. "Let's finish this." Marlowe took a deep breath and nodded. He felt the weight of the moment, but he knew this was the only option. For humanity. The transport shuttle lifted off, and as they shot into the sky, The ground beneath them shook with the force of the alien weapons still striking the Earth. The shuttle's engines hummed loudly, cutting through the thick atmosphere as they ascended toward their target. On board, the soldiers sat in tense silence, each one mentally preparing for the worst. The mission was simple: board the nearest alien mothership, infiltrate their systems, and disable their weapons. To do that, they had to navigate through a maze of alien technology and security, all while avoiding detection. If they were caught, it would be over. No one would come to save them. But there was no turning back. The fate of Earth was in their hands. When they reached the alien fleet, the sight was beyond anything any of them had ever imagined. The motherships were vast, their dark, jagged shapes filling the sky, their surface gleaming with an otherworldly energy. These ships were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, far more advanced than anything they had ever built. The soldiers' eyes widened as they took in the sheer size and power of the enemy vessels. "Focus," Marlowe's voice cut through the awe, snapping them back to the task at hand. "We have one shot at this. Stick to the plan." The shuttle maneuvered expertly through the alien defenses, avoiding detection as they docked onto one of the ships. The team disembarked quickly, weapons drawn and ready for whatever awaited them. They moved in perfect synchronization, using the environment to their advantage, blending into the ship's shadows. Every corner was a potential trap, and every step forward felt like they were walking toward an uncertain fate. As they navigated the ship's halls, they were struck by how different everything was. The corridors were dark and foreboding, filled with strange, glowing symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. The technology around them was alien in every sense, beyond anything human minds could comprehend. The walls seemed to hum with a quiet, eerie power, and the air felt thick with tension. It was like they had entered a different world entirely. They reached their first target, an alien security checkpoint. The soldiers set to work, disabling the guards' weapons and knocking them out before continuing forward. They couldn't afford to alert the enemy to their presence. Every move had to be calculated, every step taken with absolute precision. Their mission depended on it. As they moved deeper into the ship, the alien technology grew even more complex. They'd reached the core control room, a massive chamber at the heart of the mothership. Inside, strange, alien beings were at work, operating consoles covered in glowing, incomprehensible symbols. The team set up the makeshift hacking device that Dr. Carter and the other engineers had developed. It was their only hope for breaking into the ship's systems. Marlowe watched as the countdown to disable the weapons began. The tension in the air was unbearable. If they could succeed in this, they might buy humanity enough time to strike back. But as the device hummed to life, a sudden alarm rang out, piercing the silence. The ship's security system had detected them. It wasn't enough to stop them, but it was enough to set everything in motion. "We need to hurry," Marlowe shouted, as the first wave of alien soldiers rushed toward them. The soldiers fought fiercely, but they knew they were running out of time. The fate of their mission, and possibly the fate of Earth, rested on their ability to disable the mothership's weapons before the alien forces overwhelmed them. The countdown continued to tick down as the battle raged on. The chaos inside the alien mothership escalated as the soldiers fought desperately to hold their ground. The mission had been simple in theory: disable the weapons, escape, and make their way back to Earth. But nothing had gone as planned. As soon as the alarm blared, everything changed. What was supposed to be a precise infiltration had turned into a battle for survival. Colonel Marlowe's mind raced as he fired his weapon, taking down the advancing alien soldiers one by one. His team was doing everything they could, but the alien forces were relentless. The ship's corridors were now flooded with soldiers who were unlike any enemy they had ever faced. They didn't just fight. They seemed to anticipate every move. It was as if the aliens had expected this invasion all along. "Keep moving," Marlowe shouted, his voice trained. "We need to finish the job." But even as the mission seemed on the verge of failure, a small glimmer of hope appeared. The hacking device Dr. Carter had developed was working. The ship's systems began to flicker, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though the alien fleet was losing its cohesion. The weapons systems were shutting down, one by one. But the victory was short-lived. The aliens had a failsafe, an emergency protocol designed to protect their ships in case of infiltration. The systems they had been hacking into suddenly locked down, and the countdown halted. The soldiers were now stuck in the heart of the alien warship, surrounded on all sides by enemies that seemed to multiply with every passing second. The sound of alien footsteps echoed down the hallways, and the temperature in the ship dropped, as if it was alive, reacting to the presence of the humans. The deeper the soldiers ventured into the vessel, the more it felt like the ship was closing in on them. It wasn't just a machine. It was something far more advanced, far more dangerous. It had a mind of its own, and it was no longer willing to let them escape. The team regrouped in a narrow hallway, their backs pressed against the cold, metallic walls. Sweat beaded on their foreheads, but their eyes were focused. They had to finish this, no matter what. Marlowe glanced over at the engineer who was manning the hacking device. The man's hands were shaking, but his determination was unshaken. "I can't promise it will work again," the engineer said through gritted teeth, "but I can try to access a backdoor in their system. If I can trigger the failsafe override, we might still have a chance." "Do it," Marlowe said. "We don't have a choice." As the engineer worked frantically, the soldiers set up a perimeter, ready for the inevitable attack. They knew that the alien forces were closing in on them. Their time was running out, and the only thing that stood between them and certain death was this one final effort. Suddenly, the lights in the corridor flickered and went out. The ship had gone into lockdown. Panic surged through the soldiers' veins. The once vibrant hum of the ship's engines was now replaced with a deep, unsettling silence. Then the door at the end of the hallway slid open, revealing a dark figure. It wasn't like the alien soldiers they had fought before. This was different. It was larger, more menacing, its body covered in intricate, shimmering armor. It moved with a grace that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Its eyes glowed, piercing through the darkness like twin suns. The soldiers instinctively raised their weapons, but the creature was too fast. In a blur of movement, it was upon them, its claws extending with unnatural speed. One soldier barely had time to react before he was knocked aside like a ragdoll. Another soldier fired, but the shots bounced harmlessly off the creature's armor. It was invulnerable. "Fall back," Marlowe shouted, realizing they were no match for this new threat. But there was nowhere to retreat. The hallway was narrow, and the alien soldiers were closing in from behind. Desperation clawed at their hearts, but they didn't have the luxury of giving in. They had to hold their ground, and they had to hope that the engineer could complete the hack in time. The creature lunged at them, its claws raking across the air. Marlowe ducked just in time, but one of his men wasn't so lucky. The alien's claws cut through the soldier's armor with ease, leaving nothing but a bloody heap on the floor. The air was thick with tension and the smell of ozone as the creature prepared to strike again. And then, in that instant of chaos, the engineer's voice rang out. "I've done it. I've triggered the override." The ship trembled beneath their feet, and for the first time since the mission began, there was a sense of hope. The alien creature paused, its head tilting as if sensing the sudden change in its environment. Marlowe seized the moment. "Now, move out." With a renewed sense of purpose, the soldiers sprang into action. The alien creature hesitated for a moment, but that hesitation was enough. Marlowe and his team launched themselves forward, taking advantage of the brief window of opportunity. They fought through the remaining aliens, pushing forward with a fierce determination that had been absent before. They knew they were running out of time, but they weren't about to let everything they had fought for be in vain. The ship's systems flickered again, and suddenly, the alien forces seemed less organized. The weapons that had been so deadly before were now offline, leaving the invaders vulnerable. The tide had turned, but they were still far from safety. "We're almost there," Marlowe yelled as they reached the control room, the final battleground. "Finish this, and we can get out of here." The engineer slammed the override key into the control panel, and the ship groaned in protest. It was as though the ship itself was fighting to stay alive. But the damage had been done. The weapons were disabled, and the ship's defenses were collapsing. With no time to waste, Marlowe and his team set their final charges and ran for the shuttle bay. The countdown to their escape had begun, and they knew they didn't have much time before the alien ship began to break apart from within. The darkness had been held back, but at what cost? Would they survive long enough to return to Earth? Only time would tell. The escape from the alien mothership was nothing short of a miracle. As Marlowe and his team raced through the dark, metallic hallways, the sound of their footsteps was drowned out by the shrill alarms echoing from every corner. The ship was collapsing around them. The systems that had once hummed with deadly power now flickered like a dying star, their once unshakable dominance crumbling under the strain of the sabotage. It was a race against time. Marlowe's heart pounded in his chest as he led the charge toward the shuttle bay. His mind was sharp, focused only on the task ahead. But every corner they rounded, every hall they traversed, seemed to offer more challenges. The ship was no longer a fortress. It was a death trap. As systems failed, the ship's internal defenses became erratic, causing sudden power surges, and in some areas, the floors became slippery with unknown fluids that leaked from damaged pipes. Yet, the soldiers pushed forward, their determination unwavering. Their mission had been to disable the weapons systems, and they had done that. But it had come at a price. Every one of them knew the ship wouldn't hold together for much longer. They needed to escape, and quickly. The alien creature they had encountered earlier was still fresh in their minds. It was the most terrifying thing they had ever faced, and it was clear it was no ordinary soldier. It seemed to be part of the ship itself, a guardian or perhaps an extension of the ship's will. But for now, it was a threat they couldn't afford to think about. The immediate danger was the ship's impending collapse, and their race to the shuttle bay was their only chance for survival. The shuttle bay was just ahead, but as they reached the final hallway, an explosion rattled the ship, sending a shockwave through the corridors. The team was thrown off balance, and the air was filled with the deafening sound of metal twisting and bending under pressure. Marlowe gritted his teeth and fought to stay on his feet. His soldiers, though disoriented, quickly regained their composure. "Move, move, move," Marlowe shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We're almost there." Ahead, the massive bay doors loomed, the shuttle bay just beyond. But there was something wrong. The doors were closing. The ship was locking them out. "Come on, damn it." Shaw, one of the soldiers, yelled. He sprinted forward, his weapon raised, but the doors were closing too quickly. There was no way they could reach it in time. "Get to the control panel. We need to override it," Marlowe barked, pointing to a small terminal on the wall. Shaw and another soldier dashed toward the terminal, punching in commands as fast as they could. Behind them, the sound of alien soldiers approaching was growing louder. The countdown to the ship's destruction was well underway, and they didn't have much time before everything collapsed. Come on," Shaw cursed as he fumbled with the controls. Just a few more seconds. Marlowe looked around, his instincts telling him they weren't going to make it if they didn't hurry. He knew there was no way the alien ship would be able to hold together much longer, and if they didn't escape now, they'd be trapped inside its crumbling hull. The control panel flickered, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then, with a mechanical groan, the bay doors slowly began to reopen. The soldiers let out a collective sigh of relief, but there was no time to waste. They rushed forward, diving into the shuttle bay, just as the doors opened wide enough to allow them through. Behind them, the alien soldiers began to pour into the hall, but there was no stopping them now. The shuttle bay doors were their only path to safety. Inside the shuttle, the soldiers quickly strapped into their seats, weapons still at the ready, though their hands trembled from the adrenaline. Marlowe stood in the front of the shuttle, looking out the small viewport as the bay doors began to close behind them. "We're clear," Shaw shouted from his seat, breathing heavily. "Get us out of here." The shuttle's engines roared to life, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the team was moving. The shuttle shot out of the bay and into the vastness of space, leaving the alien mothership behind. But as they sped away, the sight of the alien ships still sent a chill down their spines. The massive fleet was in disarray, their weapons offline and their ships falling apart. But even as they escaped, a sense of dread gnawed at Marlowe. They had won a battle, yes, but they had not won the war. The aliens were not defeated. The mission was not over. "Status report," Marlowe barked as he turned toward his team. "We've got a clear path for now," Shaw said, his voice shaky but relieved. "But we're not out of the woods yet. Those ships won't stay down for long. They'll rebuild, and we'll have to deal with them again." Marlowe nodded grimly. "We'll be ready. We can't stop now. We have a planet to save." The shuttle continued to race through space, heading back to Earth. As the alien motherships receded into the distance, a sense of unease lingered in the air. Marlowe couldn't shake the feeling that they were far from safe. The alien threat was far from over. They had only struck a small blow, and it was only a matter of time before the invaders regrouped. But humanity had done the impossible. They had fought back, against all odds, and survived. And now they had a fighting chance. For the first time in a long while, Marlowe allowed himself to breathe, just for a moment. They had made it out alive. But the war was far from won, and the true battle was only just beginning. The journey back to Earth felt like the longest stretch of time any of the soldiers had ever experienced. The vast emptiness of space, once a symbol of human curiosity and exploration, now seemed more like a void, an endless, oppressive reminder of the battle that still loomed over them. They had escaped the immediate threat, yes, but the war was far from over. Inside the shuttle, the mood was somber. The adrenaline that had fueled their escape was beginning to wear off, leaving behind the exhaustion and the weight of what they had just survived. The mission had been a success, but at a great cost. They had lost good men and women along the way. Their comrades, whose faces they would never see again, weighed heavily on their minds. Colonel Marlowe sat at the front of the shuttle, his hands gripping the controls as he stared out into the void of space. His face was etched with lines of fatigue, his eyes hollow from days of constant stress. But beneath it all, a fire still burned. The mission had been a victory, but it was only one battle in a much larger war. The aliens weren't going to give up so easily, and humanity had to be ready for whatever came next. "How's the ship holding up?" Marlowe asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the crew. "We've got minimal damage," Shaw replied from the rear of the shuttle. "The systems are stable, but we'll need to do a full check when we get back. The engines are good, but I wouldn't trust them too far." Marlowe nodded. It was good enough. Right now, all that mattered was getting back home and regrouping. But as much as he wanted to let the tension slip away, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach. The aliens had been ruthless before. Now that they had been wounded, they were sure to retaliate, and humanity was nowhere near ready for the next wave. "We need to get a full report to command as soon as we land," Marlowe said. "The next phase of the plan starts now. We don't have time to rest." The soldiers shifted uneasily in their seats. No one was expecting rest. They all knew what came next: preparation. The war wasn't going to be won in a single strike. It was going to be a long, brutal fight, and they had to be ready. The shuttle sped through the atmosphere, nearing Earth's orbit. As the planet came into view, a small sense of relief settled over the team. The sight of their home, blue and green against the backdrop of the endless black, was a reminder of what they were fighting for. It was their world, their future, and it was worth every sacrifice. As the shuttle entered Earth's atmosphere, The team braced for the rough descent. The shuttle rocked violently, but Marlowe's steady hands kept it on course. They had survived the alien mothership's collapse. They had survived the impossible. They could survive this. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the shuttle touched down. The familiar ground of Earth, once taken for granted, now felt like the most precious thing they had ever known. The soldiers disembarked quickly, their boots hitting the soil with a solid thud. The sound was grounding. They were home, but the war was far from over. Command was already waiting for them. General Thomas, the head of the Earth Defense Forces, was standing by the landing zone. His face was grim as he saw Marlowe and his team approach, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Well done, Colonel," General Thomas said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of the situation. "You've done the impossible, but we've only just begun." Marlowe nodded, his face hardening with resolve. "What's the status on the rest of the fleet?" Thomas's face darkened. "The alien forces are regrouping. They've lost a lot of ships, but they've got a fleet that's still operational. And we got reports of new ships arriving from deep space. They're sending reinforcements." Marlowe clenched his fists. He had known it wouldn't be easy, but hearing it out loud made the situation even more real. "How soon before they strike again?" "We don't know yet," Thomas replied. "But we have to be ready for anything. We need a counterattack, and we need to build a force capable of pushing them back. This isn't just about defending Earth. This is about taking the fight to them." The enormity of what Thomas was asking hit Marlowe hard. It was one thing to fight for survival. It was another thing entirely to go on the offensive. But the truth was, humanity had no choice. If they didn't strike back now, they might not have a chance later. "We're going to need more ships, more soldiers, more firepower," Marlowe said, his voice firm. "And we need it fast." "We're already working on it," Thomas assured him. "The Allies are mobilizing. We've started construction on new weapon systems and ships. We've learned a lot from the alien tech. It's not much, but it's something." Marlowe nodded. "Good, but we can't afford to wait. If we give them time to recover, they'll come at us with everything they've got." "We'll be ready," Thomas said, though there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. The alien forces were unlike anything humanity had ever faced. Their technology was far more advanced, their tactics unpredictable. And despite the victory they had just secured, no one knew exactly what to expect next. As Marlowe turned to look at his team, he saw the same determination in their eyes. They had been through hell and back, and they had survived. But the battle had just begun. The next phase would be even more brutal, and the stakes were higher than ever. But there was one thing the aliens didn't understand. Humanity would not back down. "Let's get to work," Marlowe said, his voice unwavering. "We've got a war to win." And as the soldiers made their way toward the command center, ready to prepare for the next phase of the fight, one thing was certain: humanity had just begun to fight back. The days following their return to Earth were a blur of meetings, briefings, and preparations. Colonel Marlowe hardly had a moment to himself. The weight of their survival hung over him, but more pressing was the realization that they had only scratched the surface of the war ahead. The alien forces had been dealt a blow, but they were far from defeated. If anything, they had become more dangerous, more cunning. Marlowe sat in a dimly lit briefing room, surrounded by maps and holographic displays of the alien fleet. Each line on the map represented an enemy ship or a battleground yet to be fought. The war was far larger than they had ever imagined. And now they had to prepare to face it head-on. "Colonel, the latest intel from our satellites confirms what we feared," General Thomas said, breaking the silence as he leaned over the map. His voice was heavy with the burden of leadership. "The aliens are regrouping, and they've begun constructing new ships. Their technology is beyond anything we've ever seen." Marlowe stared at the holographic display. It was hard to believe that just weeks ago, Earth had been a peaceful world, blissfully unaware of the coming storm. Now, They were at the heart of a war that could determine the fate of their planet. "We've barely dented their fleet," Marlowe said, his voice grim. "What we've learned so far is barely a fraction of what they're capable of, and we don't have much time before they come at us again." "We're working on that," Thomas replied. "We've mobilized our allies and are pooling resources for a counteroffensive. But we need a plan, something that can cripple them for good." Marlowe nodded, his mind racing. He'd been in countless battles. But this felt different. This wasn't just about victory. It was about survival. The aliens were relentless, and if they didn't strike back soon, Earth might never get the chance to. He glanced around the room at the faces of his team. Shaw, the engineer who had saved their lives on the alien mothership. Carter, the scientist who had been integral to their sabotage mission. Each one of them had a role to play in this larger war, and each one of them knew that the fight was far from over. "What if we don't play by their rules?" Marlowe asked, a spark of inspiration lighting in his eyes. "What if we don't just wait for them to come to us?" Shaw raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we go on the offensive?" Marlowe nodded slowly. "We've seen their weaknesses. We know their tactics. They're powerful, but they're not invincible. If we take the fight to them, if we hit them where it hurts, they might not be able to recover in time." The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. A counterattack would be dangerous, but it was the only way forward. If they waited for the aliens to regroup, they risked losing everything. They had to act fast. "I'll make the necessary preparations," Shaw said, already pulling up schematics for new weaponry on his tablet. "But we're going to need everything we've got. And then some." Dr. Carter, the scientist, spoke up, her voice steady, but filled with determination. "We've been studying their tech. We've barely scratched the surface, but there are potential weaknesses we can exploit. If we can reverse engineer some of their weapons, we might be able to turn the tide." "We'll need all the firepower we can get," Marlowe said, looking back at the map. "But we also need a strategy, something that will draw them in, make them vulnerable. We can't just hit them head-on. We need to outsmart them." General Thomas crossed his arms, deep in thought. "You're right. We need to cripple their command structure. If we can take out their leaders, disrupt their ability to coordinate, the rest of the fleet might fall apart." The pieces of the plan started to come together. They couldn't take on the entire alien armada, not yet. But if they could take out key targets, weaken the enemy's control, they might be able to break their will to fight. "I'll lead the strike team," Marlowe said without hesitation. "If we're going after their command, we'll need boots on the ground. I'll take a small squad. We'll infiltrate their base, take out their leaders, and cripple their communication systems." "Are you sure about this?" General Thomas asked. "We've lost too many already. This mission—" "I'm sure," Marlowe interrupted. "This is our best chance. If we succeed, we can throw their entire fleet into disarray. We've seen what they're capable of, and we've seen their weaknesses. We have to do this." The room fell silent for a moment. No one needed to say it. This mission would be dangerous, but the stakes were too high. They couldn't afford to wait. Marlowe turned to Shaw. "Get the tech team on it. We'll need everything you've got to make this work." Shaw nodded, already pulling up a new list of equipment. "I'll get to work on the new weapons. You'll have everything you need," Carter added, "and I'll coordinate with our scientists to reverse engineer their tech, if we can get even one advantage." Marlowe cut her off with a sharp nod. "We'll make it work." With the plan set into motion, Marlowe took a deep breath. The weight of what they were about to do pressed down on him. But in the quiet of that room, something else stirred within him. A deep, burning resolve. This wasn't just about saving Earth. It was about showing the aliens that humanity wouldn't bow down, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. "We're going to win this," Marlowe said, his voice unwavering. And with that, the plan was set in motion. The soldiers went to work, preparing for the most dangerous mission of their lives. They knew that this was just the beginning. The war wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, they had a fighting chance.